Hello. Oh, he's got me on right at 4:30 as he's supposed to. Welcome to everyone here in the Star Theater. Welcome to those who are streaming this live in their staterooms. And welcome to those who are going to watch this later on TV. I got to get back to my spot, or else the camera doesn't get me. I'm totally confused today. Not only can't I find my way to my stateroom, but the time's changed, and I got about 4 devices that all the clocks are different, and my wife keeps changing the alarm clock in the room. So I'm lucky I got here. I actually thought it was 3 o'clock. So this is the last of the 4-part series, which I've called Sharing North America. I do have a spot at 5 o'clock on Wednesday, but it's going to be on a different topic. This is the end of this. So I would like to thank the group that's shown up. There seems to be a lot of consistency here. I thank you. I've gotten to know many of you here and some of you around the ship. I do apologize. They put the lights on and I can't see anything when I'm up here. So I do apologize if I don't say hello to you when around the ship, but I do appreciate when people come to see me. Let's start with a recap. I've done this before. Bud Taylor, that's the name. Spent most of my life in the Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Quebec City corridor. That's kind of reversed in there. Sorry about that. But I've spent that time in the corridor. 1995, we went to Dallas. Met a lot of great friends that are our friends to this day, Americans, who are very curious about this relationship between Canada and the United States. So I spent some time researching that, and over the last 10 years, I've been talking to groups like this about that relationship, and I call it Sharing the North American Continent. This is the 4th and final in the series. Again, to recap, the first was about the French and Indian War, which is where we see Washington, George Washington, light the spark that starts the war, ends up with the British expelling the French from North America. The second talk is the Revolutionary War from a Canadian perspective. That was a lot about the creation of United Empire Loyalists, the populating of Canada, which completely changed the demographics and shape of Canada. Last night, we talked about the War of 1812, which you can't put much cosmetics on it. It was a pure annexation play. Today, we're going to talk about the American Civil War, again, largely from a Canadian perspective. And this Civil War, the reaction to it in Canada was the creation of the Canadian Constitution, the constituting of the Canadian Federation in 1867. My caveat, as usual, is my contemporary historian who I love, well, I don't love, but I like her, Lucy my wife's here, I gotta watch what I say. So, Lucy Worsley, and she says that history is weaving together rival interpretations of manipulated truth. I find that to be very accurate. I do my best to tell an accurate story here, but it is a story, and I try to do that in a balanced way. None of this is intended to offend, although some of it might get uncomfortable. Okay, we ready to begin? We're to talk today about the American Civil War. As I mentioned, the result of this war is really the creation of the country we know today as Canada. I'm going to talk about it in 3 segments. We're going to talk about Canadians who fought in the Civil War. We're going to talk about the elite or some influential groups in Canada, largely in Montreal, that were insurrectionists, that were financed insurrectionists to foment rebellion from the Union northern border. And then we're going to talk about the Constitution a little bit and the Canada that we have today. That's the program. I hope you'll enjoy it. I back up here a little bit. A gentleman mentioned to me that he was hoping to learn a bit more about Canada, and I want to back up to where we were. Here is about 1860. The green parts, dark green, light green, are what are known at this time as Canada West and Canada East. Obviously now they're Quebec and Ontario, and I've tried to use the terms Quebec and Ontario just so I wouldn't get into this. These Quebec, the Canada West, Canada East, were derived out of 1891, the Constitutional Act, when Ontario was cut out of Quebec. That became Upper Canada, Quebec became Lower Canada. That's because of the flow of the St. Lawrence River, even though the St. Lawrence River is pointed up. Now, you should also recognize the provinces New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Nova Scotia. Those are known at this time as the Maritime Provinces. They are not part of Canada. When Canadians speak of this time, we talk about British North America, and that includes the Canadas and the Maritimes. You'll see Newfoundland floating up there in the right. Well, Newfoundland comes into Confederation in 1949, so it's not part of this discussion. And when you include Newfoundland in the Maritimes, that becomes the Atlantic provinces. It's worth looking at some demographics. The first two columns, I know you've committed to memory because I've showed this to you before. You see the population of Europeans in about 1775. The population yesterday, when we talked about the War of 1812. And then the population significantly increases when we get 50 years later to around 1860. You see the big change is in Ontario. It's come large, and it's taken over Quebec as the most populous province. The population of Ontario is largely immigration policies from England. They largely sent their poor and poverty-stricken people from East London and sent them to Canada. My grandfather was one of those. He came to Canada when he was 8 years old, alone. Quite a story. You always wonder about your ancestry, and there's some pretty brave people behind us. Canada East, the increase in population there is largely the Catholic Church encouraging large families to counter the invasion of English. So, moving ahead, this is a representation of a monument that is dedicated to the Canadians who fought in the U.S. Civil War. There were about 40,000 of these Canadians, about 35,000 fought for the Union, and about 5,000 fought for the Confederacy. If you're wondering about the significance of that group is larger than the army that Lee surrendered at Appomattox. Now, you might ask yourself, why are Canadians fighting in the U.S. Civil War? Well, there are sort of two reasons that I think hold up. Number one, the colonies, the British colonies, have been abolitionists since 1833. In 1833, Britain passed a law saying no more slavery within the colonies. That doesn't mean they didn't interact in the slave trade still, but no more slavery in the British colonies. So it's kind of a moral thing. Canadians very easily say, I can go and fight for that moral cause. The other reasons are kind of location specific. You have Halifax that hopefully we get to sometime. and in Halifax, we see Canada's neutral, and they play both sides of the neutrality game to make as much money as they can. They facilitate blockade running down the East Coast. So there's trade comes over from Britain. It loads in Halifax. It goes down the East Coast to the West Indies, the British West Indies, and then goes into the southern ports. Similarly, the British buy cotton from the south and send it back up. So for Halifax, it's a straight commercial play. The other one is in Toronto. And in Toronto, you have a very small, I repeat, very small, group of elite people who are well-financed, who do not like the idea of abolition in the South. They do not like the idea of free blacks. Their play, again, I'll just say it's very small, but they finance a lot of activities. Very small, but their play is strictly a slavery play. The next one that we'll get to is Montreal. And Montreal is interesting because it becomes the center of activities directed into the United States. What's their problem? In this instance, their problem, they empathize with the South, as you can imagine. They feel that the South is dominated by the North as they are dominated by the British. They're very much afraid that there will be a strong army on their border soon, and that's going to take over not only British North America, but it's going to change their lives forever. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 3 people who actually fought in the Union Army. Our first one is Sarah Emma Edmonds, and she's from New Brunswick. We get Dr. Alexander Augusta, and he's actually from Norfolk, Virginia. And we're going to talk about Captain Edward Doherty, who is from Quebec. So we'll start with Sarah. This is a photo of Sarah. She's in her Union uniform. She left an abusive family and a potentially abusive husband in a farm in New Brunswick. When she was 20 years old, she escaped and enlisted in the Union Army. She enlisted as a male nurse. She is heroic. The stories of her, she served at the First Battle of Manassas, Bull Run. She was known for, tending to wounds, cutting off limbs, and burying the dead. She fought in a lot of major battles. She fought at Antietam. She fought at Fredericksburg. At a point in time, she takes this experience and she becomes a messenger, a courier. She's known to get behind Confederate lines, get information, and take it back to the Confederacy, or to the Union. Now, she wrote a book, Unsexed, right? Really catchy title, in 63. In the second edition, her publisher suggested she change the title to Nurse and Spy in the Union Army, which she did. So she describes a lot of her courier messaging in this book. And we kind of think, because there's no record evidence of this, that she embellished that to become a spy. She puts herself out as a spy. She talks about disguising herself as a black man. She disguises herself as an Irish woman. She gets behind the lines. She gets information. She brings it back to the Union officers. In 1863, she catches malaria. And rather than going to a Union hospital and being found out, she deserts. After the war, she petitions the government for a $12 a month pension. And of course, she's refused because she's a deserter. There is a write-in campaign that the authorities cannot resist from her former colleagues and from people she attended to, showing the courage and empathy of this woman. The deserter title is taken off, and she's the only woman to get a pension from the Civil War, the Union in the Civil War. Now, she dies in La Porte, Texas, and she's given full military honors. Our next guy is just a little more complicated. This is Dr. Alexander Augusta. We got names in here that I get confused. But Alexander Augusta, he's born in Norfolk to free parents. He's free. And his desire is to be a doctor. He applies to the University of Pennsylvania and is refused based on his race. So he takes private instruction from one of the instructors there, and gets very interested, but he knows he'll never be a doctor in the United States. So he moves to Canada, and there he sets up this drugstore in Yonge Street in downtown Toronto. And that drugstore funds him going to the University of Toronto. He is the first black doctor in Canada, and he fights hard for liberties, social injustice in Canada. And he himself incurs some racism. He applies to be the coroner in Kent County, and he's refused because he's black. In 1863, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, he looks at this and he says, I want to be of use to my race. He petitions Lincoln, he sends him a letter, and the board, the medical board of the Union Army, refuses him. So he takes a train to Washington, presents his case. Eventually, he becomes the first black doctor in the Union Army. What does he do? Well, largely, he tends to contraband camps and contraband hospitals. Contraband, of course, is the escaped enslaved people from the South. As the Union Army gets down into the South, enslaved people escape north, and according to the Fugitive Slave Act, the Union is supposed to send them back to their owners. General Butler is faced with this problem because these people keep coming into his camp. And what is he going to do? Well, he says, I'm not buying that. I'm not doing that. These are not property. These are not enslaved property. These people are contraband. Just as I might capture a cannon in a war, I wouldn't give that back to you. Now, these we're not giving back. So contraband camps. Now the Union has to do something with this large inflow of basically refugees, and they set up contraband camps, contraband hospitals, and Dr. Augusta changes the medical practice in these hospitals. He also, while he's in D.C., he fights for liberty and for civil rights there. He himself incurs racism again. A lot of officers just won't serve with him. Finally, I look at him as more than a medical person. I look at him as a civil rights leader. He fights hard, and eventually when the war is over, he becomes again the first black doctor professor at Howard University, and is the first black officer interred in Arlington Cemetery. So by now you're saying, well, that's really nice, but the guy's not Canadian. And you'd be right. But he is a mentor, and he mentors lots of people. And one of his mentors is Abbott, Dr. Abbott. And Abbott follows him to these contraband hospitals in Washington. Again, puts in deep service. And in April of 1865, Abbott is at Lincoln's deathbed. Mary Todd is so impressed with the kindness of this man. He's not allowed to do medical procedures. He's just there to assist the medical team. But Mary Todd is so impressed with the kindness of this man that she gives him a gift. And the records are unclear. Is it a lock of his hair? Is it a piece of his shawl? It's really not clear. But he does receive a gift. Records clearly show he's there. Of course, there are no photographs of the death of Lincoln, but there are paintings. I have studied a dozen paintings of Lincoln's deathbed. There's not one black face in the group. Abbott was literally painted out of history. When he goes back to Toronto, my final point on him, when he goes back to Toronto, he gets the coroner's job that was refused to Augusta. Those two guys have names, both names start with A's, and they float through my mind. So that's what goes on with him. Now we turn to Captain Edward Doherty. Doherty comes from Quebec when he's about 22. He's at the First Battle of Manassas, and he's dragging wounded bodies into the stone house where Emma Edwards is tending to the wounded. He gets captured at Bull Run, the first Bull Run. He's pardoned, and he becomes part of a prisoner swap. He goes back to D.C., joins the cavalry, becomes a first lieutenant here in the U.S. He becomes a lieutenant, a first lieutenant, and has a pretty distinguished career. But basically, he's protecting Washington, the city of Washington, from raids. Now, when Lincoln is shot and laying in his deathbed, Secretary Seward wants somebody to go get this guy. He's a cavalryman. He's got 26 people available. He's experienced, and he's ready to go. They go out, along with some others, these 26 cavalry, and they run Booth down in Port Royal, Virginia. They trap him in a tobacco barn, and his buddy there, Tom Corbett, shoots him. And there's always a controversy whether this was a military action or whether it was an assassination. But we know a lot about this raid because Doherty was meticulous in writing out report. We also know a lot about Corbett. In 1858, he was still in Massachusetts, and he was running kind of a debauched life, a lot of interaction with prostitutes, and he got a spiritual message from God. And God told him that if he wanted to get off this debauched life, he should castrate himself. And he did with a pair of scissors. So after he castrated himself, he went for a walk, he had dinner, and then went to the hospital. Now this guy is really one of the all-time crazies. And it's documented. You know, I've given this talk 3 or 4 times, and when I was reading it this afternoon, I was thinking, "But is that really right?" I went back online, and yeah, he did it. So he after the war, he goes out and lives a life of debauchery in the West. He's jailed several times. He's put in an insane asylum. He escapes from there, and nobody ever heard of him after that. So that's our friend there. Now, Doherty thought that after the capture, he and his men were going to get a large portion of that top $50,000 reward. The other $25,000 is for Surratt and one of the other allies. That didn't happen. There was a big political interference. One of the investigators that were part of the troop that found Booth, he had large political connections. He got about $15,000 out of this. Doherty got about $5,000. Corbett got about $2,000. There were other $1,000 sent to some of the other troops, and some of it was siphoned off, and nobody knows where it went. So he didn't get that. But Doherty's pretty cool. He has a pretty successful military career and business career after that. At the end, he too is buried in Arlington Cemetery. So kind of proud of this guy. He rose to the occasion in one of the biggest crises of the war. Our final contestant, oh, that was it. He's it. That's all he got. Now we're going to take a look at the Confederates in Canada. And this is an interesting story. I hope it's an interesting story. I spent a lot of time developing it. So things went pretty well during 1863 for Lincoln. In 1 week, in July, the first week of July, he gets delivered 2 of the biggest victories of the war. He gets Vicksburg and he gets Gettysburg. But by the time you get to the end of 63, political things aren't looking too good, and there's an election coming up in 64. He's got riots, draft riots. He's got abolitionists after him. And he's got the Copperheads pleading for peace. But if you think things aren't good for Lincoln, take a look at Jeff Davis. Poor old Jeff. Morale is down, inflation is up, his cabinet is bickering. He knows he's not going to get a military solution. He needs a political solution. Here's a representation of nothing. Okay. Here's a representation that was in the Atlantic in 1863, the beginning of 1864. You've got Jeff Davis there down at the bottom left, and at the back of his head are the Union generals, Meade and Grant and Sherman. And as you come across, you've got the weeds here on the bottom right, and those are the weeds of treason and slavery. And slithering out of those weeds is a copperhead, making its way up onto this shaky political platform. On the platform is the vice presidential candidate, and he's holding out a peace plank. Then we get McClellan, who is holding out an envelope of armistice to Jeff Davis. And Jeff says, "Oh, Mac, help me out, for I cannot stand the pressure any longer. You will be rewarded for it." And Mac replies, "Where are you?" "Hold on till the 8th of November. Then I'll get about it. God help you until then." And that's pretty much the sentiment. God help you until November 8th, when we can get a political settlement. So what does Jeff do? He sets up the Confederate Services of America to run clandestine services throughout the Union, and he hires this person to lead the effort, the total effort, who hires this person, Jacob Thompson, and he gives Jacob Thompson about $40 million in today's value to conduct operations out of Canada. Thompson used to be the Secretary of the Interior for, at that time, President Buchanan. Here are some of the things that Thompson got into. You all have heard of Horace Greeley, the New York Tribune editor. Well, Thompson, through an intermediary, connects with Horace Greeley and says, "We want to sit down and negotiate peace." Well, this is a pretty good idea. So Greeley contacts Lincoln, and Lincoln says, "Yeah, that's okay. But A, they've got to have the authority to negotiate the peace. B, reunification of the nation has got to be there, and abolition of slavery has got to be there." Negotiations begin. They don't go particularly well. Seward's spy network in Canada quickly learned that they don't have the authority to negotiate this. Greeley goes back in disgrace. But you wonder why some politicians are better than others. This is a mess, and it's all in the newspaper, and it's just a hot mess. Well, Lincoln publishes everything. He goes totally transparent. And what it does is show Lincoln's principles, the principles to the Union, the principles to the enslaved in the South, and he makes a big win for his 64 campaign. Now this crew, another crew that was financed by Thompson, there are about 20 people in Montreal. All of this planning and financing comes out of Montreal. They send about 20 people down to St. Albans, Vermont, about 20 miles from Montreal. And the plan is to cause problems, insurrection and discontent there. What they do is they rob a bank. And they get about $4 million. They get in a shootout, somebody's killed, and these raiders escape back to Montreal. The bank gets about half of the money back, and the other half is used to finance further operations. Now, they aren't ever charged because they claim they're working under military orders. My last two, when Booth is killed, they find a banknote in his pocket for about $10,000, today's value, signed by the future mayor of Montreal. So, little going on there. And so we know he was in Montreal, and we can track his activities around Montreal. And it's pretty certain he was planning the kidnapping of Lincoln. The idea was they kidnap Lincoln, they take him to Richmond, and they make a swap for senior Confederate generals who are prisoners. Lincoln changes his schedule on the day of the planned kidnapping. It never happens. So Booth goes on to grander ideas. The last one that I'm going to show, like Thompson funded hundreds of activities. The last one that I'll show is this. This is Booth and his three brothers. It's the only time they're seen together on a stage. They're doing a charity performance of Julius Caesar, and Booth is Mark Antony, who states, the evil of men lives after them. Now, they're doing the thing, and the audience starts to cause commotion. They've got to calm it down. They go out, look in the streets of New York, and there's smoke all over the place. What's going on? Well, Thompson sent a group of about 20 people down to New York. They all took separate hotel rooms throughout New York, and they took Molotov cocktail-type bombs with them, and they were going to burn the city to the ground as far as they could, or at least cause some kind of inferno. Well, these guys, they didn't study science as well as they should have. So they set these bombs on fire in their hotel rooms, and as they're walking out the door, they close the windows, choking the fire off from oxygen. So the fire just simply smolders and creates a lot of smoke. Again, they escape back to Canada and unscathed. So the whole idea of a northern attack, to cause all kinds of riots and problems in the United States, it fizzles out. Jeff Davis's plan just doesn't work. It's too little, too late. Jeff, he, after the war, spends about 2 years in Fort Monroe, about 50 miles from my house. He doesn't do well. He's sick. And Verena, his wife, tends to him as much as possible. When he's pardoned in 1867, he goes to Montreal. And this is a picture of he and Verena. You can see how gaunt Davis looks, the look of resignation on their faces, the black mourning clothes that they're wearing. It's kind of a sad picture. This is taken 6 days after the British North America Act, which created Canada. And he gives a speech, and he implores the people to make cherished and valuable relations with their mother country. Now, this is a plaque to Jeff Davis. It was on the wall of the Hudson Bay Company in Montreal. The plaque basically says this is in memory of Jeff Davis, the president of the Confederacy. He lived here in 1867 at the home of John Lavelle. This plaque, he's a bit of an icon in Montreal. This plaque was put up by the Daughters of the Confederacy in 1957. It wasn't like it was an immediate surge of love from Canadians. The Daughters of the Confederacy put it up, and a bunch of Canadians, protesters, took it down in 2017. Now, how does this relate to Canada and the path to Confederation? This is a picture of the Canadian Fathers of Confederation. Yes, we had them too. Sitting in the front there is Sir John A. Macdonald. He will eventually become the Prime Minister of Canada. So if you think things are going on bad in the United States at this time, they're just as bad in Canada. The British have had enough. They've had enough of the expense of the Canadas, the British North America, and they want out of the game. There's no return. Today, Canada is about the 9th largest GNP economy in the world. At that time, it was worth almost nothing. In the Canadas, Canada East, Canada West, there's all this tension's been going on between French and English. The dominance of Britain on top of that has caused rebellions in both provinces. As for the Maritimes, they're pretty much left out of the picture. They've lost their prominence with Britain being a maritime power, and they are very concerned about what will happen if Britain creates Canada with a central government out of Montreal or Toronto. So things aren't going particularly well there, and so they sit down, they have discussions. The discussions go over 3 years. 1867, there is the BNA Act. Now, that doesn't get rid of thoughts of annexation. In 1866, as you see here, there are the Fenian raids, if I could spell, but there are the Fenian raids. Now, who are the Fenians? Are there Irish in the group? Oh, well, the Fenians are a bunch of Irish thugs, sorry. And they decide that they want Ireland free from British rule. So they decide they're going to attack into Upper Canada and take over southern Ontario and use that as a bargaining chip to free their brethren in Ireland. The battle goes pretty well for a while. The British regulars come in and they are pushed out. That is not the end of annexation fears. Here we have in March of 1867, just before the BNA Act, we have Seward, who buys Alaska. Seward's vision, Manifest Destiny vision, is that he wants to run a continuous United States. So he wants to run up the West Coast into Alaska and make that contiguous. In 1871, the British cede British Columbia to the new Canada, and that blocks that for a while, and Canada builds the Canadian Pacific Railroad to string the country together. We end up with the BNA Act here in July of 1867, which doesn't completely end all this annexation. We have here in 1862, the Confederate battleship Alabama. She is built in Liverpool, and she is sent then to the Azores to be outfitted for war. And whether that's a break of neutrality or not, there have been legal battles over that. This picture shows her destroying one of the 60 Union merchant ships that she destroyed. At the end of the war, Seward decides Americans deserve reparations for this breach of neutrality. So they all go to the table for the Alabama reparations, if you heard of the Alabama reparations. And there's a lot of Americans in Congress who think that the trade should be Canada. No reparations, just give us Canada. Seward is back on his old horse, and he says, no, give me British Columbia, because I still want to go up the West Coast. The negotiators don't buy any of that. There is a $15.5 billion in today's dollars transfer of money for the break of these neutrality agreements. So I'll bring you here to this slide, and we got about 7 minutes left. So I wanted to spend some time here. People always ask me, okay, well, what's the difference between Canada and the United States? We supposedly speak the same language, but people think we speak the same language as the Brits too. And what was it? Churchill said that we're separated by a common language. The two nations are separated by a common language. So think of us not as siblings, right? Think of us as cousins. Americans, we start with kind of the value set here. Americans talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Canadians on the other side, Clause 90 of the British North America Act talks about peace, order, and good government. In Canada, I wouldn't say it's a deference, but in Canada there's a respect for government. There comes a point in time when government has its job, and you have to bend to that. Not quite the same as you know in the United States. The idea of freedom, the idea of not being held back by government is part of the American ethos. So even though we talk about, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of organization, all these natural freedoms that we have, the values are imposed in those kinds of thoughts that people have. And particularly for Canadians, that flows through all of their institutions, all of their judicial institutions, all their government institutions. So it's very strong, although it is being eroded as time goes on. The big difference, the big reaction to the U.S. Civil War is the distribution of powers. As you know, in the United States, anything that isn't formally delegated to the federal government goes to the states. The exact reverse is true in Canada. They wanted no part of that idea of free states breaking away from the Confederacy. So powers in Canada that aren't explicitly set out for the provinces, residual powers fall back to the central government. Now, in both cases, they now use the taxing system to get into agriculture and education and healthcare in provinces and states. But the constitutions are very clear, if it comes down to it, where the power lies. Finally, not finally, but the idea of sovereignty. I study a lot of political philosophy, and I don't know why, it never paid me anything. But sovereignty is a strong concept. The concept of sovereignty in the British run of history, from Magna Carta throughout, is that the sovereign, the king, the queen, the sovereign is the representation and embodiment of the ongoing existence of the country. In the United, and governing rests with the people. So legislatures do the legislating. Now, like King Charles has absolutely no power, no political power. He has representative power, that's all. In the United States, it's different. Now, the U.S. government grew out of France and philosophies that were going on there at the time, British philosophies, and they've got this experiment. And like doctors, I kind of wonder, when are you going to stop practicing, right? When is this experiment going to end? But you've got this experiment, and the experiment is completely different. The idea of sovereignty, the idea of the ongoing existence of the country rests in the people, as does the government. So if politicians come and go, sovereignty stays, but it stays in the people. Two fundamentally different concepts when you watch the operations of these governments. We got 2 minutes left. What this ends up with is completely different political, social, economic structures. When I think of the United States, and I've lived here for 30 years now, I think of a pyramid, right? At the top, you have some really, really rich people. And at the bottom, you have some really, really not so rich people. And they're connected by aspiration through what is supposedly different classes. In Canada, I think of it as a beehive. There aren't many really, really rich people at the top, and there aren't many really, really poor people at the bottom. It's clustered around the middle. Those are the principles, I think, that change. And this is the end of my fourth talk about sharing a continent, and I really hope you've enjoyed it, because I've enjoyed spending time with you. Thank you very much.